In these two lessons, we're going to take a look at factors and divisibility. Let's go ahead and take a look at what a factor is and write down a definition so that we have that in our notes. A factor is a number multiplied by another number to find a product. Every whole number greater than 1 has at least two factors, and a factor pair are two numbers multiplied together to get a product. Let's look at what that means. So let's say we have the number 7. We can find the number 7 through multiplication by multiplying 1 times 7. Both the number 1 and the number 7 are factors of the product of 7. Now 7 is a prime number. It only has two factors, 1 and itself. So we call this prime. The other type of numbers that we're going to talk about are composite numbers. Composite numbers are numbers that have more than two factors. Let's take a look at the number 12, for example. We can multiply a variety of factor pairs together to get a final product of 12. Some of those factor pairs would include 1 times 12. That's going to equal 12. We also have 2 times 6. That would give us 12. And 3 times 4 gives us 12. Notice how our numbers start to get closer together as we go through. Our factor pairs do. So all of the factors for the number 12 will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. And they kind of make a rainbow when we connect their factor pairs. So we have 1 times 12 gives us 12. 2 times 6 gives us 12, and 3 times 4 gives us 12. And then once we reach this point where our numbers are right next to each other, we don't have any other factors for that number because they're just going to repeat backwards. So the number 12 has 3 factor pairs and a total of 6 factors, whereas the number 7 only has 2 factors, 1 in itself. Notice how all of these numbers, whether they're prime or composite, have the number 1 as a factor. We can consistently rely on this throughout the point of finding factors. The number 1 is always going to be a factor of a number, and the number itself is always going to be a factor of the number. So 7 is a factor of the number 7, and 12 is a factor of the number 12. 1 and that number are always factors. The other numbers depend on what we know about divisibility rules and what we can multiply to find those factors. Let's take a look at finding the factors of numbers. Here we have the number 6. To find its factors, we can think about our divisibility rules. We want to think, what can we multiply times another number to give us that as the product? So we want 6 to be our ending product. Now, we just talked about how the number 1 and that number are both going to be factors of that number. So how we list them, this is a factor pair. 1 and 6 are both factors of the number 6. Now, because the number 6 is an even number, it's also divisible by 2, which means 2 is a factor of the number 6. I can multiply 2 times 3 to get me 6. Now again, because my 2 and my 3 are one and then the next in sequence, I know that I'm done factoring my numbers. I don't have any other factor pairs that I could find. If I'm listing these factors in order from least to greatest, that's when I list them in kind of like my rainbow. So I'm going to have 1 and 6, and then 2 and 3. And all of these 4 numbers are my factors of the number 6. Let's take a look at a bigger number, and I want to see how many factors can you find of the number 15. What are two numbers that you can multiply together to get 15? Well, 1 and 15 are always going to be a factor pair. Do we have any other factor pairs? Are there some divisibility rules that we can use to help us find those factor pairs? It's often helpful if we go in order. If we start with 1 and then we go, okay, is 2 going to be a factor? Is 3 going to be a factor? How about 4? How about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10? When we go in order, it helps us not miss out on any factors of our numbers. So we already have 1. 1 is already a factor. Now we're going to look at the number 2. Well, our divisibility rule for 2 says our number has to be even to be divisible by 2. Is 15 an even number? We have to look at the ones place. 5 is odd, so 15 is not an even number, which means it is not divisible by 2. Our divisibility rule for 3 says the sum of the digits is divisible by 3, then our number is divisible by 3. In order to find the sum of our digits, we have to add 1 and 5 together. So 1 plus 5 gives me 6. Is 6 divisible by 3 without having anything left over? Yes, it is. If I divide 6 divided by 3, I get 2. So 15 is divisible by 3. Now I need to think about, well, what number do I need to multiply times 3 in order to get 15? Well, 3 times 5 gives me 15. The only other number now that I need to check, because I have 3 and 5, is going to be my 4. All of these other numbers are going to be obsolete because I found that sandwich of my numbers in my factors. So now I need to think about 4. My divisibility rule for 4 is if the last 2 digits are divisible by 4, then the number is divisible by 4. Because 15 only has 2 digits in it, I'm going to think 15 divided by 4. Am I going to end up with a whole number, or am I going to have something left over? I can't multiply 4 times anything to get 15, so 4 is not a factor of 15. So 15 has 4 factors: 1, 3, 5, and 15, if they're listed in order from least to greatest. My 2 factor pairs are 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. Our next number is 24. Go ahead and list your numbers 1 through 10 and see which of those numbers are factors of 24. Again, when we list our numbers, it helps us not forget about a factor pair. So we're going to start with 1, because we should always start with 1 and the number that we're trying to find our factors of, which in this case is 24. 1 times 24 gives me 24. The next factor I'm going to check is the number 2. In order for my number to be divisible by 2, or for 2 to be a factor of my number itself that I'm starting with, in this case 24, has to be even. Is 24 an even number? Well, I look at my ones place, and my even numbers are 2, 4, 6, 8, and 0. And 4 is an even number, so my number is going to be divisible by 2. So now I just need to think, 2 times what gives me 24? If I'm not sure, I could divide. 2 goes into 24 12 times, so 2 and 12 are going to be my factors. I'm going to move on to my number 3. If 3 is a factor of my number, that means that 24 is going to be divisible by 3. My divisibility rule for 3 says the sum of my digits is divisible by 3, then my number is divisible by 3. So I need to add my 2 digits up in this number. So 2 plus 4 gives me 6. And then I need to see, is 6 divisible by 3? Yes, it is. So because the sum of my digits is divisible by 3, my number is going to be divisible by 3. So 24 has 3 as a factor. Now I need to think 3 times what gives me 24? 3 times 8. So now I've used my 3 and I've used my 8. And because now I found my sandwich, I can cross out my 9 and my 10 as well. I know that those are not going to be factors of 24. Okay, I'm going to move on to the number 4. If 4 is a factor of the number, then the 2 final digits of that number have to be divisible by 4. So I have to think, is 24 divisible by 4? Yes, it is. 4 times 6 gives me 24. So 4 times 6, and 4 and 6 are both going to be factors, so I can cross both of those out. And because I've used both of those, I know that 7 is not going to be a factor of 24. So the last number I need to check on is my number 5. In order for 5 to be a factor of a number, the last digit in that number, so in this case my 4, has to be a 5 or a 0. Because 4 is not a 5 or a 0, my number is not divisible by 5, and so I have all of my factors. If I list these factor pairs in order from least to greatest, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, and 24, all as factors of my number 24. So 24 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 factors. I want you to find all of the factors of 63. List your numbers of 1 through 10 on top and see which of those digits is a factor of 63. 1 is always going to be a factor of our number, so 1 and 63 are going to be 2 of my factors. My number is not even, so it is not divisible by 2. If I add up my two digits, if I add 6 plus 3, I get 9, and 9 is divisible by 3, so my number is going to be divisible by 3, so 3 is going to be a factor. Because I know that 3 is a factor, I need to figure out, well, 3 times what is going to give me 63. I can use what I know about division to help me with this problem. I know that 3 times 2 gets me 6 and 3 times 1 gets me 3. So 21 is going to be my other factor here when it comes to my 3. So 2 was not a factor, 1 was, 3 is a factor. 4, well, 63 is not divisible by 4, so 4 is not going to be a factor. I look at my ones place for 5. My ones place is not a 5 or a 0, so it's not going to be divisible by 5. My number, in order for it to be divisible by 6, has to be divisible by 2 and 3. Well, my number is not divisible by 2, so it's not divisible by 6. 7, is my number divisible by 7? I have to think about division here. Can I multiply anything times 7 to get me 63? Yes. 7 times 9 gets me 63. So I cross out my 7, I cross out my 9. I can cross out my 10 as well because I found that sandwich. And then 8. 8 is not a factor of 63 because 8 times 8 gets me 64. So I'm left here with my factors of 63. I have 1 times 63 is going to be equal to 63. 3 times 21, and then 7 times 9 gives me 63. Going through my row of 10 really helps me find all of my factors of my numbers. Go ahead and do this problem. Find all of your factors of 54. I'm going to start with 1. 1 and 54 are always going to be factors of my number 54, or of any number, 1 and that number itself. 2, is my number even? Yes, my number is even. 4 is an even number, so 2 is going to be a factor. Now I just need to think about, well, 2 times what is going to get me 54? If I'm not sure, I have to do some division. 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. I subtract, I'm left with 1. I bring down my 4. 2 goes into 14 7 times. So 27 is the other factor here of 54. So there's my 2. Is my number divisible by 3? Well, I can tell by adding up my two digits. Is 5 plus 4 going to be something that's divisible by 3? 9. Can I divide that by 3? Yes, I can. So 3 is going to be a factor. Now I need to think 3 times what gets me 54. If I'm not sure, I have to divide. 3 goes into 5 one time. 3 times 1 gets me 3. I subtract and I'm left with 2, and I bring down my 4. 3 goes into 24 8 times, and so 18 times 3 are going to be factors as well for 54. So I have 3 and I have 18. Is 4 going to be a factor of 54? Can I divide 4 evenly into 54? I cannot. 4 would not go evenly into 54. How about 5? Is 5 going to be a factor? Well, my ones place is not a 0 or 5, so 5 is not going to be a factor. How about 6? Is 6 going to be a factor? Well, because 2 and 3 are both factors, 6 is going to be a factor. 6 times what gets me 54? 6 times 9. So 6 and 9 are both my factors of 54 here. How about 7? Nope. And 8? Nope. And 10? No, because I went through my sandwich. So here are all of my factors of 54. Let's do one final problem. This one's going to be a word problem. Miss Ike bought 36 popsicles. She wanted to evenly distribute all of the popsicles. How many students should she give popsicles to evenly? So I have a total of 36. I need to split it evenly into groups, and I want to know how many groups can I split it evenly into. In order to solve this problem, I need to find all of the factors of the number 36. Find all of those factors of 36 now. Okay, I have my 36. I'm going to start with 1 and 36. Those are always going to be factors, so 1 and 36. I go on to 2. Is my number even? Yes, 36 is an even number, so it's going to be divisible by 2. Now I need to think 2 times what gets me 36. If I'm not sure, I can divide. 2 goes into 3 one time. 2 times 1 is 2. I subtract, I'm left with 1. I bring down my 6. 2 goes into 16 8 times. So 2 times 18 is going to give me 36. So 2 and 18 are both factors of 36. I move on to 3. Is 3 going to be a factor of 36? Well, I need to see, is 36 divisible by 3? So I'm going to add my 2 digits up and I get 9. Is 9 divisible by 3? Yes, it is. So 3 is going to be a factor. So 3 times what gets me 36? Well, I know that 3 times 12 gets me 36. Is 4 going to be a factor? Is 4 divisible by 36? Well, can I divide 4 evenly into 36? Yes, I can. 4 times 9 gets me 36. So I have my 4 and I have my 9, which means that 10 is not going to be a factor. Is 5 a factor of 36? Well, is my last digit, my ones place, a 5 or a 0? No, it is not. So 5 is not a factor. Is 6 a factor of 36? Well, because 2 and 3 are both factors of 36, I know that 6 is, yes, going to be a factor, because that's my divisibility rule for 6. If 2 and 3 are factors, 6 is also a factor. So 6 times what gives me 36? 6 times 6. So 6 does not have to be repeated in my factor list. And because 6 repeats itself, 7 and 8 are not going to be factors because I can't keep going. And I'm done. I have all of my factor pairs. So Miss Ike could have given popsicles to one student. Well, one student would get all 36 popsicles. 2 students, and each of those 2 students would have gotten 18 popsicles. 3 students, and each of those students would have gotten 12 popsicles. 4 students, each of them would get 9. 6 students, which each would get 6 popsicles. 9 students, which would each get 4 popsicles. 12 students, each of those students would get 3 popsicles. 18 students, each of those students would get 2 popsicles, or 36 students and everyone would get 1 popsicle. That's how our factors can help us. Remember to use your divisibility rules to help you when you're finding your factors of numbers. List those numbers 1 through 10 and go through order so that you don't miss a factor pair. All right, that's all about factors and divisibility. I'll see you next week when we talk about common factors.